Preseason game number 2 is done. The New York Football Giants are undefeated in the preseason, and yet more injuries on the way for Big Blue. Daniel Jones has a positive performance, and the wide receiver room where we are not entirely sure where exactly that depth chart is going to go. Coming up next. Yes, friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, of course, we are your hosts. Over here in a safe space is Adam Armbrecht. I'm breaking down the Brooklyn Nets over on the Locked On Nets podcast, and yonder there, the season generational ticket holder, the healthy, wealthy, and wise on a winning Monday morning, Mr. Andrew Makowitz.
I mean, I know it's preseason, but it still feels good to win, Adam, right? I mean, you wake up, we have a lot of positives to take away from the game before. The Giants won. It's like, all right, like, could
winners win, baby.
Yeah,
winners win, baby.
I'm not going to be the one to apologize about the Giants winning. I'll tell you that, right?
You better believe it, man. So, as we say, the Giants do beat the Cincinnati Bengals. We don't know if it means anything. They're still running that tracker for the Baltimore Ravens and their preseason undefeated streak. That's 22, 23 games or something like that. It obviously doesn't matter as much as we may want it to. Before we dive in on the conversation, which is going to start with injuries because that's the biggest piece of this, Andy, feel free. This is for YouTube mostly, but we can all sing along if we want to. And make a deal with God, and I get him to swap places. That's right. If you could, you would have. Any Giants fan swapped places with Kayvon Thibodeaux last night. As we know, he leads the injury brigade because coming around the edge there, he basically gets taken on the chop block. We know nobody likes it. Everyone hates chop blocks. I'm not going to sit here and beat up the kid for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think he came across. Even Harry Carson said on the broadcast, that's where if you're Kayvon Thibodeaux, you know he's coming across to block you. You got to dip that knee. You got to dip that shoulder. You got to blow that guy up and continue to pursue the quarterback. Nevertheless, in that moment, good Lord, did the collective breaths of the New York Football Giants fan base just kind of go,
It didn't look good, Adam. It didn't. Initial, listen, there's some back and forth on Twitter on whether or not it is a dirty play. It looked like there was an understanding at first when they're both going in for contact that it's going to be one of those, like, we're going to block up high and we're going to get in each other's way. And as Kayvon Thibodeaux does that, the guy ends up going low at the last second right at his knee. It did feel like, in preseason, you're like, man, what are we doing here? Yep. Obviously, other people are trying to make their own way and they're trying to make a roster, trying to make a play. It felt bad. Obviously, Kayvon Thibodeaux's down. The trainers are looking at him like you said, he's the one guy that we're all excited to see. He's got that explosiveness. The last thing we need is a knee injury from him. He weighs off the cart, says, no, I'm fine. Okay. Goes into the blue tent, talks to some people. And I think we all felt a little bit better seeing him come out of the tent, a little bit joking with some of his teammates. You saw a little bit of his, passion and personality come out, which made it feel like we're hoping that the news isn't as bad as the initial reaction to what happened.
Yeah, a couple of reporters in the tunnel after the game got him passing by in street clothes, said, I'm good news, I'm fine, it's all good. Now, it doesn't mean, well, first of all, it means one thing. You're not going to see him in preseason game number 3. I can guarantee you that right now, right? That's over. But it looks like certainly more positive than it initially felt in the moment. Because, again, chop blocks and then everybody, listen, I'm going to tell you right now, we used it here for the YouTube viewers having a little bit of fun with it, but you don't need to slow down the video, zoom in tight on the leg and show the way it's a sideways bending knee, something that knees don't do. Like, we don't need to see that visual, but it looks like better off than maybe we first thought. One thing we're going to talk about, there's a few other injuries in this game. Obviously, one of them that ties into a long-standing theme for OGP, and that is the surface on which the New York Football Giants play football. However, I just briefly wanted to say on Kayvon Thibodeaux, don't take this the wrong way. He's gone through the preseason. To me, it's very much felt like he's been kind of methodically working through the process, and that's a good thing. But in preseason games, I don't think that he's playing quite at full speed in these preseason games just yet. It looks like he's trying to, hey, you want me to drop back in coverage, as he did in yesterday's game a little bit, right? Get out on the sidelines. I think that he's trying to grasp the Wink Martindale system. I think he's trying to evolve what he is as a player. And that inherently, even that play where he gets chop blocked, it felt like he kind of sauntered down into it and then got his knee taken out. So, It's unfortunate. I'm glad he made it through it. I continue to want to see him get up to speed here. And just like anybody else on this team, he's going to miss the last preseason game, maybe going to miss some time on the practice field, most importantly. Hopefully it doesn't cost him anything in terms of being ready for week 1. But we do turn our attention, obviously, to other injuries there as well, unless you have a closing thought that you want to share about Thibodeaux.
No, bubble wrap him. Make sure that he's ready to go week
Okay.
1. I would have loved to have seen him get a sack or 2 in the preseason just to see that explosiveness. But like you said, if he's just feeling it out, trying to feel the NFL speed, I'm fine with it. And obviously, if he's saying I'm good right now in street clothes, like nothing to be concerned about, there is other concern on the defensive side of the ball.
Well, yes, and so quickly, let's kick these couple ones out of the way. Graham Gano, speaking of kicking, got kicked in the head as he was diving to try to stop a return by the Bengals. So he went out with concussion protocol. Shouldn't be anything long-standing, but, hey, put him in some rap too as well.
I have a thought about that.
Sure.
Can we just say, like, kicker, like, the special teams coach should be like, kicker, under no circumstances do you go anywhere near the ball. Like,
well, let's do it. Like
in the preseason, like, what are we doing? Like,
you know what? I was gonna even in the regular season, like in a lot of ways, like I know, like if you're there and you don't make the play, everyone's gonna look at you. But at the same time, be like, hey, listen, everybody else, you go tackle him. I kicked the ball. You go stop him from returning it 30, 40 yards down the field. Special teams has been a problem, and we'll talk about that maybe later in the week. But yes, I agree. What do you do? And I know,
just get out of the way. You're a Pro Bowl kicker. It's the preseason. You get kicked in the head, and now like we don't know if you're going to be ready. We have the punter kicking extra points. It's like
the Scottish Hammer is going to be fine.
Yes, but that was a small side note, obviously.
Yes, the other quick one, too, was C.J. Board, who had that fumble on the punt return there. He went out with a rib injury as well. We'll see what happens. And we'll touch back in on the wide receiver room here in a little bit because there's some interesting developments. That's what preseason is about, seeing guys that maybe can spark and give themselves a chance to make the roster and shake some things up from a depth chart perspective. But the other big injury was our boy, my boy, your boy, the boy. Man, really, he's a man amongst boys. Darian Beavers, who came out of that first preseason game looking good, looking strong. He comes up. There's a running play coming through the middle. He goes to plant his foot, and for all intents and purposes, it doesn't mean that it couldn't have happened on another surface, but the turf surface really seemed to grab those cleats, hold them down in, and then have him twist a little bit awkwardly on his leg there. So they're saying they listed it as nothing. It started as ankle foot, and then it moved to like knee. So I think, again, when you get caught in that turf like that, you don't know how high up or potentially how damaging the injury could be. No reports yet as everyone scrolls through Twitter waiting for these updates on Monday.
Yeah, and just some of the Twitter updates. So Art Stapleton, beat writer for the Giants, very well respected. Someone said, how many games do you expect Beavers to miss? And his response was, I think you're going to have to wait until next, like 2023, to be able to see him back out on the field. So they were like, it's more than likely that Beavers is going to miss the entire season. They're not optimistic.
That's so crazy. Like, it didn't seem like in the moment, it was like, oh man, he got his foot caught in the turf. But like, arguably, you thought Kayvon Thibodeaux, we were freaking out that he was going to be gone for the year. Like, this one didn't in the moment feel like anything as intense as missing the entire season.
The problem is, Adam, when you're talking about it kind of getting jammed in the turf, it's hard because you just think about it like you and me, like,
walking slowly down a grassy hill.
You're like when you're talking about an NFL player who is 6'4", that has 256 pounds of torque going into trying to hit another guy. Like, it's just the sheer like size of him alone means that like he slightly twists his knee. Think about how much pressure it is if it just sticks in the ground. And you mentioned it before. We're not going to labor the point, but it just reinforces this idea of the field turf being silly at MetLife and how opposing teams have complained about it for years, starting with the San Francisco 49ers. The Giants seem to have tons of ACL injuries when they get out on the field for preseason. It just hits home the fact that like maybe we really should be rethinking if we have this field turf. I know it looks good for like TV viewing purposes.
God,
like,
those colors pop.
Yeah, like, wow, that fake green is really great on TV. It's like, well, it's not great, the product, when the players can't be on the field because the ACL keeps getting blown out. So, like, how about we have good players on the field and the turf looks spotty? It's just crazy.
Okay, Andy, you want to have a competitive football team. Well, guess what? Image matters, right? And nobody has a greener looking field than Big Blue. Those colors in the end zone, those logos, they pop like you wouldn't believe. So how dare you? I get choked up a little bit. We will get into this more as it unfolds because almost no other team in the NFL still works with turf. And when you see these injuries, and by the way, we talked about this before, and people say injuries happen. All right, they do. And again, the Thibodeaux one, nothing to do with the field. However, the Darian Beavers one clearly does seem to have that, and they do pile up. And I'll say this again: the only footnote is these things compound. Running on turf, versus running on natural grass, it can compound the fatigue and the wear and tear on bodies over time.
Speaking of Darian Beavers, just moving away from the turf aspect of it,
Yeah, it
it
is.
it is one of the tougher injuries for the Giants to have, not necessarily because he's a starter, but because the Giants are so thin at middle linebacker. And you've seen throughout the preseason, Carter Coughlin and Cam Brown have kind of been buried on that linebacker depth chart. They're not really getting very many reps inside. They are starting on special teams, and that's where they're contributing. But man, Beavers looked like he was primed to be in a rotational spot in the middle of that linebacking core. And now with only Tate Crowder and Blake Martinez and Micah McFadden, expect Big Blue to be looking, as we get closer to cut time for a veteran type that could come in and maybe be a rotational piece at that middle linebacker position.
Yeah, it is tricky. We just briefly on the depth piece of it, right? When you look inside that room, the edge rusher group obviously looks a little bit stronger. I mean, Austin, Calitro, who's been making some plays in the preseason, but you wouldn't think you want to go into the year with him as being the primary backup there. And I guess I wonder too. It's like Cam Brown, who's been getting some more run defensively, has been a special team standout. Is he the kind of guy that developmentally, I think he could be in that mold of being able to be versatile? Do you try to shift him into it? I think to your point, we'll talk about it during this week, looking at the market, seeing who's getting cut. Something has to happen here. And this doesn't continue to pile up. We'll probably come back in and talk more about the game specific beyond what we're going to discuss in a second here, which is Daniel Jones. There was a lot of good things. Like all of a sudden, these injuries started to overshadow everything else that happened in this game. But there were a lot of things leading up to these little pivotal moments that kind of cloud the season overall, where you thought, hey, nice little play here, some good reps there, and still some areas of similar concern. That being the case, though, now that we've successfully brought everyone down on a Monday, let's go ahead and talk about one Daniel Jones and really QB room overall. Listen, we've said it before. I talked about last time Tyrod Taylor. He looked good. All you can do is take the reps for what they are. That's all you can do with these. And Daniel Jones did exactly what was asked of him. He was very successful. He was very decisive. The things that I've liked about him now over the first two preseason games is he seems to have a little bit better of a pocket presence. We can touch on the offensive line here, who really held up with some guys playing center for the first time in their life. He shows good instincts in the pocket, those little couple of steps up to make those throws, the underneath routes, the slant routes, all of those kind of things worked well for him in this game. Maybe most notably, the back shoulder fade to Sills down the left sideline was probably the best throw that we saw from Jones in this game. This was a good game for him. This was good. This was good live game reps. That's all you can say.
I mean, we went into it saying it's against the Bengals' second team. Like, let's not overemphasize any of the stuff that happens. But it was almost like it was a no-win situation for Daniel Jones going into this, right? Because like he actually plays well, 14 of 16 with an interception that wasn't really his fault, and he looked good.
A very, very brief pause on this one, and I did this for Tyrod Taylor as well. You do it for any quarterback. That Daniel Bellinger off his hands was not his fault. Shouldn't have been a pick. Two throws earlier when he almost when it doinked off a defender's head and ended up in Colin Johnson's, should have been an interception going the other way, right? And by the way, those are essentially the only two throws that I looked at for him. And even Dan Dugan said on Twitter, maybe a little high for Daniel Bellinger. Still got to catch it. But those are the only two throws that in my mind, I was like, okay, something happened there. Other than that, very good, crisp passing from him.
You mentioned the key word was decisive. I also
Yeah.
feel like another word is assertive. It felt like they said, Daniel, here is what we want you to do. We want you to get the ball out quickly. We don't want you to get destroyed. We don't know how the offensive line is going to hold up. Remember, this is a sixth or seventh string center that you've got. You've got guys playing for the first time, organized football for the second time in their entire life. Like, keep in mind, you're not going to have the time that you need. So get the ball out quickly and make decisions early. We'll live with whatever happens. And man, whatever happened was great. Like, he actually put the ball mostly where he needed to. That back shoulder throw to Sills, as you mentioned, was like timing, rhythm, everything seemed to work there. Check the box for Daniel Jones. You have to be happy. It feels like it was progress from week 1 to week 2. And if you start seeing more of that, you start to say, okay, maybe the offense can be competent as we start to move forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, the one thing, and this isn't a knock on Jones, it's a knock on the offense. No touchdown for Daniel Jones while he's in there, right? And as we say, these preseasons, it really, it's a bummer that we're only going up against the backups to start the game. So, by the way, like the Giants should look really good. Now we know the offensive line for the Giants. I have two thoughts here. You're missing a lot of wide receivers as well, right? You don't have well, actually, only I didn't have Kadarius Toney in this one. Everybody else was out there. It felt like Kenny Golladay wasn't out there. We'll get to him in a second too. Um, Offensive line wise, like I do want to see more success in the red zone, maybe in preseason game number 3, if Daniel Jones is even out there at this point. The offensive line, the one thing coming into this game, you got guys shuffling around again, people playing at center that have never played in their career. However, the one caveat I wanted to give in this was everyone was saying it's absolutely decimated. You're on your sixth center. Yes, but you're starting left tackle, you're starting right guard, and you're starting right tackle. Those guys are all there. And I understand you're a lot of moving parts, left guard, you're getting into backup scenarios as well. But 3/5 of your line is there. So there's still enough to be able to reasonably watch tape and say, hey, this worked well, this didn't go so well, etc. And by and large, this line, as makeshift as it was, held up enough for Daniel Jones and all the quarterbacks to really put some good things on tape, I think. Um, I just, yeah, it's good. And let me ask this before we talk about Davis Webb, because I think it puts into a little bit of context here as well. Did this change anything for you though for Daniel Jones? Like I know that you're more on the positive side than negative for me around Daniel Jones. I thought it was good, but one of my biggest frustrations is that so far, and you do see a distinct difference between Daniel Jones, Tyrod Taylor, and Davis Webb in this regard. Daniel Jones, not a lot of downfield throws, right? Not a lot of opportunities to stretch the field. He's doing a really good job in what's being asked of him, but what's being asked of him is the quick read, get the ball out of your hands, be decisive in the pocket, and get it into the receivers, get it into the backside of the backfield, and let them go do the work. That's fine. I'm not knocking it, but we're not expand the playbook, right? Expand sample size. I know it's a gradual process. It's just a frustration because I want to see what he looks like when you fully open this thing up. Something we haven't even seen the Giants offense yet. Gonna let you a little secret here, guys. We know more about the Giants offense going into this season from practice than we do from these preseason games. There's no pre-snap motion. There's none of the big movement that we think we're gonna get from Kafka and from Dable.
You asked me if it changed anything for me. The short answer is no. I've been in the camp of like Daniel Jones has the highest upside of any of the quarterbacks and has the ability to win the most games if he reaches his potential. You just see it there. If he goes 14 of 16 and he's looking that way in the regular season, then I feel like the Giants have something to build on. Tyrod Taylor was fine behind him. He averaged less than 5 yards an attempt, but like he only threw the ball 11 times. That's fine. That's what you want your backup to do. Get a couple reps in. He doesn't need to light the world on fire. But then, my goodness, Davis Webb comes out of nowhere and ends up looking competent. And the first question I will ask is that more indicative of how good Davis Webb is as a backup quarterback, or was it more indicative of the type of talent that is out there in the fourth quarter for the Bengals, where he's just kind of picking apart the defense?
Well, yeah, and I mean it's your worst against your worst, right? Like so I mean the competition level is relatively the same. I think from an offensive standpoint, things open up much more easily against the defense, right? You're getting up against third and fourth string cornerbacks, etc. A lot of time in the pocket to throw and all that good stuff. Art Stapleton had a great. It was like in Earth 90-38 when Davis Webb is instead of Geno Smith put in as Eli Manning finishes out his career and given reps, and then he ends up being the quarterback and has gone to multiple Pro Bowls with the way he looked in this game. Again, what I think it is too, because we're going to talk about receivers here in a second. Everyone that's out there on the field with Davis Webb is also the guys that he's getting reps with during camp, right? And this is a factor for Daniel Jones too. Kadarius Toney in and out of the lineup at camp, right? Kenny Golladay just struggling. No Sterling Shepard in the mix. All of these things, offensive line. So at the highest level, your number ones, they're not getting necessarily all the continuity you want. Third team guys, hey, like all we're doing is getting reps and building a rapport. I will say though, as we talk about it, when you go 22 of 27 over essentially the second half, 204 yards, 2 touchdowns, he threw a good ball, right? He spread the ball around, didn't make a lot of bad plays. I think that this in the spectrum of what you take away from this preseason game is what pulls everything back in, because we know that Davis Webb is not a NFL starting quarterback. So when you see this, you just say, right, it's a lot of backups for the Bengals. You should be able to have success. And I think the only difference here is trying to get rapport with some of these receivers that affords him and his familiarity with Dable in the offense to really kind of get a little bit looser out there in a game like this.
22 of 27, 204 yards and 2 touchdowns for Davis Webb.
Yeah.
He looked great. Like there's no getting around
Yeah.
it. Regardless of what competition was out there, he looked great. He did exactly what you hope he could do, and it basically reaffirms the idea that you said, where there's kind of the wink wink, like, hey, you're going to be the third quarterback. We're going to have you active on game day, or you're going to be around this team because in a pinch we could use you or Tyrod Taylor, and your knowledge in the building is great.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that it also does, and that's why we're going to transition over to the wide receiver room, is having a competent third string quarterback like Davis Webb allows you to properly evaluate wide
Yes.
receivers,
Yeah.
which I
Really
think
good
is
point.
a very interesting thing. And look no further than Alex Bachman, a name that Giant fans we have said over the last year and change, like, I wonder if this guy's ever going to get a shot. Is he too small? Like, what's the reason why he can't get on the field? Well, regardless, he was out there, 11 catches, 122 yards, and 2 touchdowns for Alex Bachman. And, Adam, the first thing that came to my mind was like, wow, Alex Bachman looked good. Colin Johnson looked good. Like,
David Sills
does
look good.
David Sills look good? What does this mean for the wide receiver room in general? Is this, again, just like Davis Webb, backups against backups performing well, or is there something more to this?
Well, yeah, and we're putting up Bachman because he had a great day, had the 2 touchdown catches. He looked the part. And some of the plays, you want to give him as much credit as possible. I mean, just good route running. He got himself open, really competed to get towards the left pylon of the end zone on his first touchdown. The second touchdown, he catches that ball, gets tiny, little quick spin move, and maybe that is speaking to the defense that you're going up against and the ability to get in and out of that contact and get in for the second score. But to me, um, what I think it's a both it's a both and because I think that these guys, so we talk about 26-year-old Bachman, 24-year-old Colin Johnson, right? Like, hey, these guys they're young enough to be effective, right? They've been around long enough to be able to make a name for themselves a little bit. Alex Bachman said he talked with Cole Beasley, who had familiarity in the Buffalo Bills system. So trying to get some consistency and understanding of what's going to be expected of a player of his size and skill set. But the other part of it is that Kenny Golladay was out there for 21 reps. 14 of them were passing plays, and he didn't have a single effing catch. And I'm going to say it on two fronts here. It's not only that Kenny Golladay can't seem to get his legs underneath him, but it's also that Daniel Jones is going to other guys. Now, we can talk about at the high level. Well, opposing teams take away the number one threat and then deal with those secondary options. I don't know if it's the chicken or the egg here about is it that they're going away from Kenny Golladay or that Kenny Golladay isn't a threat and you're just seeing some younger guys with some healthier legs go out there and showcase that they have some real ability. I mentioned the back shoulder fade pass from Daniel Jones. That was to David Sills. Colin Johnson has just shown a lot of consistency. Even Keelan Doss, who was cut up. Hold on a second. Foster's going to go down back on the roster. He came up with a couple of nice plays. I think you're just seeing that youth matters. Youth has value. It's preseason. It's bad competition. I like specifically leaving Doss out of that room. Sills and Bachman really came out of nowhere here in this game. But those 3 players, I'll put the question back to you. Do you have confidence that those 3 players could be a viable combination in some mixer matchup to help provide real weapons for Daniel Jones if Kenny Golladay is closer to the end than the beginning?
All right, let me start with the Kenny Golladay piece first, and then I'll get to
Please.
your question.
I like
So
to
the
ask
Kenny,
like 6 or 7 questions over a
I know
2
I'm
minute.
trying to bob and weave like a boxer in the ring. I'm like, which question does he want me to answer?
Hold on,
Jeez.
hold on. I've been thinking about this a little bit sometimes, especially preseason. It's okay if we want to have a tangent. I saw an interview with Mike Tyson where he said, like, in your prime, who would win, you or Muhammad Ali? And Tyson goes into this like long, he's like, no, man, I mean, he's out there, you talk about skill set, whatever, but he just keeps coming at you. That's not rhythm. That's not him knowing the combinations. That's just him. He's just doing it, whatever. He goes and goes, no. Muhammad Ali all day. I couldn't touch that dude. And I thought, I was like, Mike Tyson, we all can picture in our minds what Mike Tyson does to human beings. And he was like, no, not Muhammad Ali with the way that he worked in the ring. Sorry. Go ahead.
Unbelievable. Well, yes. Now going back to it, the first part on Kenny Golladay is this. You mentioned that he didn't get any throws basically in his direction, didn't make any catches, was out there for 14 pass plays. But Adam, it kind of speaks to this the game plan that the team had, where they weren't taking downfield shots.
Yeah.
So when Kenny Golladay is not a guy that gets separation right off the line, he needs more time for the play to develop to get downfield to use his strengths. And if the Giants aren't doing that because the offensive line is depleted, they don't want Daniel Jones to sit back in the pocket and take unnecessary hits. There could be a whole host of reasons why Kenny Golladay isn't shining. I think it could be like scheme, offensive line situation. Like, why risk it to get him the ball? He's a veteran. He should be able to, when the lights turn on week one, be good.
Okay, but and I'm willing to buy that. But like, if that's the case, though, again, Keelan Doss had 3 for 34, and this is over the life of the game. Colin Johnson 3 for 41. Nobody had. The long was to Johnson for 23, 20 on that back shoulder to Sills, 22 to Bachman, and I think that came later in the game off of Davis Webb. But 7 catches for Williams out of the backfield. Sills had 5. You mentioned 11 for Bachman, 4 for Corbin out of the backfield, 2 for Daniel Bellinger, like 2 for Daniel Bellinger for 10 yards. Like, give me 2 catches for 12 yards for Kenny Golladay. Like, I agree with you that's because if I'm setting that precedent for Daniel Jones, then I need to be willing to acknowledge it for a wide receiver. But come on, right? Like, give me a catch, because what that's telling me is your short space ability is absolutely not. And then even further damning is that if what we're saying is for the best version of Kenny Golladay to be successful, we need time for these plays to develop downfield. But Kenny Golladay is not a burner of a wide receiver. Like, what do we need? 2.5, 3.5, 4 seconds before Kenny Golladay is there. I know he's doing it in practice, something we can touch on a little bit here too, against our secondary.
Yeah, so that was my first thing is like, look, I'm not a Kenny Golladay apologist by any means,
Yeah.
but at the same time, if we're, like you said, if we're going to afford the same thoughts to Daniel Jones about not taking vertical shots down the field because we don't want to get him hurt, that's what Kenny Galladay's strong suit is. 50-50 balls deep down the field. He's not a guy that's going to get clear separation within 3 yards of the line of scrimmage. That's just not the guy who he's been. When the other piece that you asked me was Alex Bachman, David Sills, Colin Johnson, do I have faith that they can come in and contribute and be part of this wide receiving core? The short answer is I don't think so in an entire vacuum, because look, Alex Bachman looked great against third string Cincinnati Bengal players. And, David Sills looked good with Daniel Jones, high pointed a ball, made a catch. When you think about just the pure numbers, Adam, of what's going on in the wide receiver room, I think that of those 3 guys, Colin Johnson is the only one that legitimately has a chance to make this roster, because think about it. Kenny Golladay isn't going anywhere, because if you were to outright cut him or trade him, there's just you actually lose money on the cap this year. I think you lose about $4 million by doing that. That's not going to happen. You know that Wan'Dale Robinson is
by the way, on that Kenny Golladay, sorry, just somebody pointed this out. I can't remember if it was Art Stapleton or otherwise, that the way that his contract works, it's like it actually balloons the cap hit up if they cut him. Like, it balloons the number up by the 4 million. So it adds another onto it to ends up being like 25 million on the totality of it. But yeah. And then you said Wan'Dale Robinson.
Mr. Gettleman, again, for a beautiful contract structure where we can't get out of this absolute debacle. But so because of that, he will be on the roster. Wan'Dale Robinson will be here. Kadarius Toney will be here. That's 3 that you know for a fact are going to be here. Sterling Shepard, it sounds, reports are that he's looking great. He's starting to potentially get out there. You're at 4. At most, what are you taking? 6 wide receivers, Adam? So then, like, there's 2 spots for, we haven't even mentioned Darius Slayton. We haven't even mentioned Richie James. We haven't mentioned CJ Board. Colin Johnson is another one. Of those 4, only 2 of those guys can make the roster. So then when you think about going even further, that's where you get into the David Sills and the Alex Bachmans of the world. There's just so many spots that there's not enough available spots for the amount of players that are out there. And we're saying that we're going to cut someone like Darius Slayton and CJ Board and keep Richie James and Colin Johnson. Like, there's just not enough. The numbers game doesn't work for these guys.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, Richie James was out there a little bit. Darius Slayton didn't play at all. I don't.
No,
think
he was out with an injury yesterday.
Right.
But again, that doesn't help anybody's case for him to make the roster. That's for sure.
Yeah. So and then I was just taking a look here for James was out there for a little bit. I can't remember how many reps he ended up getting, but so it is kind of like, to your point. This is what's so fascinating about, as you have injuries over the course of a preseason. It's like, so are you convinced that Richie James is good to go? And then the reason why CJ Board is still out there in this preseason game is to confirm if he's going to be the special teams guy. He has a rib injury. Is he all of a sudden on the outside looking in? Did Corbin show enough in the return game where there's some duel there? I don't think Corbin's making the roster. I think he's going to be on the practice squad. Like, all of these things are happening, and it's hard to determine whether or not a guy is playing to confirm something, to showcase something, to just save somebody else, right? And then inside of that, like Bachman, I think is the great sample size here where you go, okay, we just didn't want to risk Richie James. Maybe we're hoping that Slayton is going to be able to get traded, whatever the case may be. So put out Alex Bachman. And then he goes, well, against whoever it is, he goes 11 for 122. You go, huh, interesting. And the last thing I think we'll touch on here, we're going to come back in. There's a lot to break down from this game on the defensive side of the ball. Adoree Jackson, to say nothing of the final play of the game that sealed the deal. Fox, beautiful defensive setup from Wink Martindale where he just hit a couple of edge rushers out there on the sidelines and blew that play up to close this one out. We'll dive back into that stuff. But Wan'Dale Robinson, I think, is also an interesting question mark here, just because they haven't been able to get him going in these 2 preseason games. They say they like what he's doing in practice. And I think this is where we're splitting a little bit, because Wan'Dale Robinson and what you want him to do requires the full assault of what this offensive scheme can look like. And you're not doing that in preseason games. So I think there's a misleading nature about what Wan'Dale Robinson will be, to say nothing of the fact we haven't had Kadarius Toney out there at all. And that impacts everything that you're going to do. I'll just be curious if we think about it being Kadarius Toney and Kenny Golladay, at least to start, and then what? Colin Johnson, let's say Darius Slayton for right now. Inside of that, I think Slayton has to be gone. But then in that slot position, it's Wan'Dale Robinson and Sterling Shepard if he's ready to go. Like, did Bachman do enough to say, I should be a shifty little guy that you could use there or keep on the depth chart? I think he'd have to be showing something in special teams to qualify for that. So hopefully he's still there on the practice squad in case injuries happen, but it's hard, man. At the end of the day, it's hard to watch games like this, see players look good, and also in the back of your mind know, yeah, then that's meaningless. Like, good for you, but I don't know if it means anything for us.
Keep in mind, Adam, small footnote on that. Sterling Shepard could potentially play outside in that Darius Slayton role if they wanted him to. He has played outside in the past. So if you want to get him on the field and keep Wan'Dale, in the slot position,
Yeah.
that is the flexibility that allows you to say maybe we don't see a future for Darius Slayton. What I will say, at the end of the day, there were more positives in this game than negatives. I know we highlighted Kenny Golladay not being
After
out
the
there.
injuries, yeah.
I know that the injuries were very tough. The Giants moved the ball down the field. The quarterback play looked better. It looked improved. The wide receiver room looks very, very deep, Adam. And the last thing I'll say that we didn't even highlight, Antonio Williams looked like an NFL running back. Like, he did. He had 5 rushes, 5 yards a rush. He had 7 catches out of the backfield. You can see how they want to use Saquon Barkley. You can tell what they're thinking about utilizing that room. Antonio Williams having 92 total yards, being out there as the primary back. Like, he is carving himself out a role as that, like, wide receiver out of the backfield type guy.
Yeah, we'll come back into this. Like, I think we come in tomorrow. We talked about Dan Dugan and other people's 53-man. I think we got to do our own 53-man roster. We talked about agree or disagree. Williams looked great. So what's going on exactly? Like, Gary Brightwell, Saquon Barkley, Matt Breida, like what is happening in that room? And I guess like everyone, a lot of people are saying like Williams made a strong case for RB2 yesterday.
Right.
And I'm like, so then is Gary Brightwell automatically gone? Is that just the way that the nature of the beast? You brought in Breida, but where does he like? I don't know. Like, is Breida gone? Because I haven't, like, what are we talking about? I think I'd rather at this point, I've seen it in games. I'd rather see Saquon Barkley and 2 younger players, as much as I'm fond of, I think, of what Breida does. But it is so fascinating. And I think we can have those discussions around a lot of positions. And then don't be surprised, by the way, friends, if we're talking about cuts and new guys getting brought in here with the injuries that we saw, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And as Andy mentioned, a very thin inside linebacker group that already has concerns at the top with Blake Martinez coming off of an injury of his own. My goodness, friends, just scratch the surface of this thing. I'm not even joking. Tomorrow is going to be probably more focused on this, any updates around roster moves and injuries specifically, and then we'll continue to work our way through. We know it's coming fast and furious. Get over to YouTube. Why? Because you can watch that beautiful little sequence we played from that unfortunate moment for Kayvon Thibodeaux. You share it, you like it, you love it, you want it, you comment on it, you get that podcast feed wherever you get those needs fulfilled. Until tomorrow, my friends. Until next time, my friends. As Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.